Let's pick up where we left off, on the road up from Goldshire to the city of Stormwind, the capital of the humans and of the Alliance. The entrance into Stormwind is perhaps the grandest entrance into anything in this entire video game. This large bridge and wider entrance area is called the Valley of Heroes, and these huge imposing statues are in the likeness of 5 heroes of the Second War. Many years ago, the dark portal which first let the orcs into Azeroth opened once again. After a brutal campaign beyond the Dark Portal itself, all 5 of them were left behind. Missing and presumed dead, these heroes are forever immortalized here at the Valley of Heroes. Now, in the game's first expansion, The Burning Crusade, the Dark Portal opens once again, and we actually get to meet all 5 of them. It must have been strange them seeing huge statues of themselves. At the end of the bridge, next to a huge statue of Turalyon, is a Lieutenant Orin of the Argent Dawn, and he has a quest for us. The Argent Dawn are one of those splinter factions off from the church that very briefly got mentioned in the first episode. He tells us that the Scourge, the undead hordes which once rampaged the northern human kingdoms, have come to Stormwind and they're just outside the gates. And they are. We saw them on the way in, all of these weird ghosties that usually, by the way, aren't there. Now, if I recall correctly, they're here under the Naxxramas event. When the Naxxramas raid launched, small changes to the world were made to reflect the new threat that everyone was under. And since the Season of Discovery servers never quite progressed beyond that point, well, they're still here. We've been tasked with investigating the ghostly incursion just outside the city gates. And on the way back, I noticed the huge floating pyramid spaceship right above. How did I not see that on the way in? So we head off and bonk some ghosts for a while and then come back, and it turns out that those ghosts may have been scouts communicating with something somewhere. Now then, on to Stormwind. The next thread of that undead story I think will come along far, far later in this character's journey. Much like Horde characters' familiarity with Orgrimmar, their capital, Alliance players like me have a strong familiarity with the streets of Stormwind. I think I know this place like the back of my hand, but in case you don't, let's go on a tour. The worlds of Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2 are stitched together by this idea that Stormwind is a colony of the northern human polities that would eventually become the other 6 kingdoms of Azeroth. This is supposed to have happened well over 1,000 years ago, when the humans were divided into city-states, perhaps with strong cultural links but no real political one. Kultiris, the island nation, is also said to be a colony, and it gives this idea that the humans of back then were like the Greeks or Phoenicians of our world. And kind of like the Phoenician colony of Carthage, it eventually grew into a power in its own right. This independent and very distant kingdom is said to have thrived and done really well at the bottom of the Eastern Kingdoms. They've always had good relations with the Dwarves of Ironforge, strong mountainous boundaries between the Dark Iron clan and the Gurabashi trolls to the south, and quite a lot of coastline and lots of farmland. This all being said, the Stormwind of today is not the Stormwind of the past, because in very recent history, almost all of Stormwind was burned to the ground. The hordes, or horde of orcs, which first appeared from the Dark Portal, defeated Stormwind's knights on the field again and again, and eventually reached the city, besieged it, and sacked it, and razed it. After this, the Horde moved northwards into the Dwarven kingdoms and into the northern human kingdoms. This triggered the Second War, and after the end of the Second War, following an orcish defeat, it was time for the refugees of Stormwind to head back and reclaim their kingdom. Unfortunately, how they went about doing this doesn't seem to be explained anywhere, but it wasn't long before they were set back up and the long and arduous work of reconstruction began. Pretty much everything you can see here is a result of that reconstruction, which was only a few decades ago, aside from pieces of the old town, which, lacking the radical renovations of the rest of the city, is the run-down slum area. Stormwind has quite an extensive canal system, and this is what distinguishes each of Stormwind's distinct districts. So, the Valley of Heroes is the entrance, the old town off to the side is the slumish area, and upon entry to the city proper, you're greeted with the Trade District. This is where all of the players spend their time. You've got your basic vendors, the auction house, and the bank all right next to each other in close proximity. Stormwind's Flightmaster is just off of a road from this district too. And I think the vast majority of Alliance players will bound their Hearthstone here to this innkeeper. Upon your first entry to the city, you'll also get a couple of breadcrumb quests, an excuse to visit the wine shop by the canals, for example. And this is quite needed to coax a new player into exploring the rest of the city because it is quite overwhelming. Each player will need to find out where the trainers are for their classes. All of the game's different professions have trainers here, but they are also all spread around. What is important to the player in this city is entirely dependent on the identity of the player. A priest who's learned, say, herbalism and tailoring, and a rogue who's learned skinning and leatherworking have entirely different priorities when travelling throughout the city and will be found in entirely different places. Next up, the Mage Quarter, which is where you'll find lots of mages. It's full of lots of tailoring and clothes shops. Its most prominent feature is the Mage Tower, which is where people get teleported to upon entering a mage portal that would take them to Stormwind. And in one of the taverns, there is a secret basement where warlocks can get their training. As a paladin main and someone who's never leveled a warlock before, I didn't know that this place existed for a very long time. There are entire sections to this game that you will never interface with if you are one character as opposed to another. This is by far the most significant with the Alliance and Horde factions. There are many zones that I just don't really know my way around because I've never really played a Horde character. But this happens with class distinctions and profession distinctions as well. You will see in this Paladin playthrough places that only a Paladin would ever bother to go to that no other class would have a reason to visit. Quests which only someone of my class would ever get to experience, and it is some of the best content in the game. In fact, if you didn't know, the reason for this channel being called Verrigan is named after a Paladin class quest in this game. It's an ode to how much I loved that experience, and it's a reference for other Paladin players. Up next is the park, and this is the least visited of the districts of Stormwind. It does have some uses, there are a couple of trainers, and there's actually a unique bit of Season of Discovery content here, which we'll get to later on in this video. But for the most part, this is a place for role-playing. There are several establishments left empty. You will very rarely find a reason to go here. Quests will very, very rarely take you here. This place really is for parties, it's for social events among players, it's for role-playing. And it is perhaps the most relaxing part of Stormwind. The park is in fact a small night elf colony within Stormwind. The night elves of Narcissus live a very, very, very long way away. And in order to properly support the Alliance, they need what is essentially an embassy in the main city of the Alliance. On the other side of town is the Dwarven district, the Dwarven equivalent to this embassy. But it should be noted that a strong relationship between the humans of Stormwind and the Dwarves of Ironforge has existed for a very long time. The Dwarves of Stormwind are a deep-seated demographic, and as of the rebuilding of Stormwind, have a direct tramline link to Ironforge. Now, on this channel, I've ranted about the Deep Run tram many times because I love it, and that rant will come again. But for now, let's move on to the final district left, and the one where our character is headed, Cathedral Square. Oh, and there are some other places. For example, the Stockade, the prison, is a dungeon, and it's right here next to the Mage Quarter. Stormwind Keep, where the royal family and aristocracy are, is right here between the Dwarven district and Old Town. And Stormwind does have a port, though it's not accessible until the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, and it is massive. Each class has their home in Stormwind, and as a paladin, the cathedral is ours. In the cathedral is a paladin called Dithorian Rawl. I've spoken to him many times on this channel, and it's his job to guide the more inexperienced paladins like us. He gives us the Tome of Divinity and tells us to study it. The book teaches us that, though on the outside it seems that paladins are all about swinging their hammers and throwing their hammers, the truth is that the core purpose of a paladin is to aid others. And it says that though strength on the battlefield is important to a paladin, so are also things such as compassion, patience, and bravery. To Stormwind wants us to start with the first tenet, compassion. We need to go and help someone out in Stormwind who needs it, someone who is trying to do good in the world but can't without our help. This quest takes us out of the cathedral and into the trade district, but someone else in the back of the cathedral has caught our attention. A paladin called Ada Gelhardt has gone missing. Apparently she was acting strange in the days before her disappearance, and she was last seen down in the cathedral crypts. There is no official quest associated to this mystery, but let's go look down beneath us for clues anyway. Stormwind's cathedral has quite expansive crypts below it, and if you don't know where you're going, you can get lost down there. Now, to my knowledge, there is absolutely no gameplay reason at all for these crypts to exist. They're just an extra empty area to get lost in. And this is something that Season of Discovery does well. It gives a very interesting use to completely useless areas. Because this is a Season of Discovery quest, by the way. Down in the chamber at the bottom of the crypts is a charred note. A note that someone tried to burn in a hurry, but of course failed. It's a note addressed to Ada, and it says something about a darkened bank, an agent, and a passphrase, which seems to indicate that some kind of covert meeting is going to be taking place. The note is from someone called Mitchells, who I've never heard of before, and it ends with the quote, "As one candle is snuffed out, another is lit." It isn't clear where this island at the darkened bank is. We get no markers or any other form of help to guide us towards it, and the meaning behind these metaphorical candles is completely lost on me. Let's try to bear this note in mind in our future adventures in Elwynn Forest. Okay, so we've had a long day adventuring and it's really dark. Let's wind down at one of the local taverns that very conveniently is where one of the Season of Discovery rune quests are located. Now, the quest that we just started with Romulus at the cathedral is quite well situated. If you're a priest or paladin, you'll be in close proximity to him by accident, and if you're an experienced player, you'll notice Romulus as someone who shouldn't quite be there and so go up and talk to him. In fact, that's how I found him for the first time. But I don't know any low-level characters who would just casually be hanging out at this tavern in the park and then just so happen to talk to the bartender and realise that she has a problem that we can solve. Stuart at the back there has gotten a bit too drunk and he's been harassing the customers, so we have to play the bouncer. Trying to be diplomatic doesn't work and he tries to kill us with his mug. In an entirely appropriate response, we try to kill him with a huge hammer. Now, I remember on launch night finding this guy and waiting in a queue for a good 10 minutes. There were several paladins all in front of me in the queue that needed this quest, and his respawn timer was quite long. Thankfully there was no waiting involved this time though. We knock him out and then return to the bartender and get our reward. The Rune of Rebuke. Rebuke is an incredibly useful spell. It allows us to interrupt spellcasting. If any enemy is trying to use a charge up ability on us, we can just press the Rebuke button and block it. This is an amazing piece of utility for paladins when they already have so much utility, and makes us just that bit more useful in dungeons and in multiplayer content in general. So the next day we find ourselves back in the market. And what would you know? Right in front of us is a woman named Stephanie Turner, and she needs our help. She and her husband in Ironforge have one of the most stereotypically selfless jobs you can possibly think of. They make clothes for children at the local orphanage. Sadly, recently an influx of new tradesmen dealing in cloth, I think she means us, the player base, has driven up prices and she can't afford to do so. We need to get her 10 linen cloth. Thankfully, we, and I imagine most players at our level, already have the linen cloth required, as cloth drops from humanoid enemies, and between the kobolds and the defiers, we've been fighting a lot of those recently. We hand over the cloth, she thanks us, and we go back to Dithorian Raw. Simple as that. Dithorian congratulates us on completing our first task, and then gives us a symbol of life, and the next stage of our training. In northeastern Elwynn Forest, north of Eastvale, is a secluded circle of stones on an island on a lake called Hero's Vigil. His friend, a dwarf named Gazin, barely escaped from there with his life after a conflict with the Defias. He's just at the altar at the back of the cathedral, and when we talk to him, he tells us the full story of what happened at Hero's Vigil. Reports had came in of a Defias incursion in the area, and when he and his friend Henza went to go check the place out and provide proof of that incursion, they saw some Defias looking over some documents. However, their attempts to take the documents failed and they were quickly outnumbered. Gazin's friend Henza held them off while he escaped, and presumably has fallen. It's our job to get over to Hero's Vigil and recover Henza, one way or another. And if we're as gifted as Dithorian thinks we are, we should be able to use the Symbol of Life to help him. Okay, we've spent enough time in the city, let's get back out there and adventuring. It's time to head east to Eastvale. I did do a few things first. For example, I bought some bags off of the auction house because my luck in getting any to drop was terrible. And suffering from a lack of bag space is an intense annoyance in this game. Earlier I mentioned some breadcrumb quests like going to the wine shop. I did those in Stormwind, and the previous night I also went to Pestil's alchemy shop and handed in the quest there we had from Goldshire. And I also delivered the package meant for Elmore from the blacksmith at Goldshire. He offered a follow-up quest to take us to Loch Madan, far away in the Dwarven Kingdom, but that would be way too much of a tangent to this story, so I didn't accept it. This itself is a breadcrumb quest to get you to explore faraway areas, and while it's a welcome proposition, if I explored every zone on this character, I feel like his story would never end, so anyway. Earlier I mentioned the fact that some areas are only useful to certain classes, and this is the case for this mysterious building in the middle of eastern Elwynn Forest, the Tower of Azora. As a paladin with no real business being here, it makes a really strange point of interest along the journey, just an extra bit of detail. It's a way of properly populating your world space whilst stopping it from feeling distractingly dense. Here is the bridge into Eastvale, and next to it is Guard Thomas. We were told in the last episode to ask Guard Thomas if there was any news of a possible murloc infestation in the local area, and unfortunately, there is. And also, out here in the fringes of the forest, the local populations of wolves and bears has grown more aggressive and rampant, and need to be culled. I imagine this culling needs to be done for the exact same reason as the one in Northshire, one of the first quests we got in the game, because all of the hunters are likely now abroad fighting in the army. Thomas says that not too long ago, a couple of guards were sent northwards to investigate the murlocs. They've not returned, and so Thomas has asked us to try and find them. In Eastvale proper, oh well, I make it sound like it's a settlement, but it's more so a handful of houses next to a logging camp, are some more quests for us.
Greetings.
Sarah Timberland says that the Defias in Northshire wear burlap masks, but the Defias here in Elwynn wear linen masks. This maybe hints towards some kind of distinguishment of rank. The finer the material your mask is made of as a Defias bandit, the higher ranking you are maybe. Anyway, she seems to be quite into fashion and she'll make us some linen clothing out of them. And back to that wildlife problem, the supervisor at the logging camp can't convince her workers to return their lumber because of the amount of dangerous wildlife in the area and wants us to collect it for them. So it's quite clear that the people of Eastvale need our help. Let's get to work. On the southern shores of Stonecairn Lake, we find one of the 2 missing guards, or at least what's left of them. The second guard is nowhere to be seen, but what we can see are footprints heading east towards the Murloc village. There are 2 Murloc villages around Eastvale, and both of them, for me, represent the first major challenge of World of Warcraft. There are so many of them, and alone, it's really hard to defeat them all. They respawn quite quickly, and it's very easy to pull 3 more than you intended to. I got into quite the skirmish with them, but after it was all done, alongside the fresh corpses of many Murlocs, was the remains of the corpse of the second guard. We now have both of their medallions, a fantasy alternative to a dog tag. Let's go back to God Thomas and hand them in and tell him the bad news.
Go with honor, friend, for the Alliance.
Thomas wants us to now go report our terrible news back west to Goldshire, but we have lots of unfinished business here. Very pressingly, we need to rescue Henza the Dwarf from Hero's Vigil, just to the north of here, in Stonecairn Lake. Well, Gazan wasn't wrong. This island is full of the Defiers. And more than that, they're all rogue wizards. You know, they cast spells on us which can slow us. And this is one of the first times where we have to come to grips with status effects. If we get hit by their balls of ice, we get slowed, and so it's always best for us to close in as quickly as possible and take them out. Of course, the fact that they are wearing robes and not armor makes the taking out part easier than usual. And that new rebuke ability comes in really handy here, as whenever they try and cast a spell on us, we can just say, nope, no you don't. Up on a bit of a mound, presumably at the site of the battle between Gazan, Henza and the Defias, is the corpse of Henza. He sacrificed himself so that his friend could escape. Thankfully, especially for him, we have the symbol of life still with us that the Thorian Roll gave us back in the cathedral, and with it, we can do this. Back to life, Henza thanks us for saving him. He's going to head back to Stormwind and report everything he's seen. But he never found those documents, and it's our job, before we follow him back to Stormwind, to retrieve them. Not too many Defias later, we find it, the Defias script, and we can read it. It says that the Defias are using Hero's Vigil as a base camp from which they can conduct operations further into Stormwind's territory. This place is a huge memorial to those lost during the First War, but seemingly has become forgotten. It's described as a once great bastion of faith, and it seems to have just been abandoned by Stormwind. The Defias' occupation of this area is quite poetic, and we'll discover why at some point in the future. It's very important that this script makes it back to Stormwind, but there's some other stuff to do first. Like, for example, pick up this deed to a farm in Westfall. I'm sure the original owner probably wants this back. We'll get around to that eventually. Back in Eastvale, we hand in some quests, most importantly the Red Bandanas quest, because now we have the red linen shirt, an iconic piece of clothing for anyone leveling in Elwynn. Now, you can make this shirt with the tailoring skill, but when you see a low-level player wearing one, you know where they've been. It's a bright marker, almost like a cloth medal of their achievement that many people recognise. The nicest home in Eastvale belongs to an old retired Marshal, Marshal Haggard, and he asks us to report to someone called Gryan Stoutmantle, who is an NPC in Westfall, the zone after Elwynn Forest. You can get this quest from many different guards in the game, but I gave old Marshal Haggard the opportunity because he's the most unique. I do love long walks along the road that passes through Elwynn Forest, but after heading all the way westwards and then being given a quest to go all the way eastwards again, it does get a bit old, because then I've got to go all the way westwards again. And though the Hearthstone comes in really usefully here, it's on a 60-minute cooldown. The quest was just to get a free reward from Sarah Timberlin, but on the way in, things have developed on the Murloc front. Guard Thomas now has an official bounty. We need to collect 8 torn Murloc fins, and earlier I mentioned that there are 2 Murloc villages in the local area. The first one we've been to. The second one is just to the south by the river. This river, by the way, has no name. I couldn't find a reference to the name of this river anywhere, which is really strange considering how importantly placed it is. As I'd mentioned earlier, fighting murlocs in this game is hard, especially alone. And after finding this shiny chest in the middle of the village, I got ambushed by a lot of them. It wasn't long until I realised that I could not handle this, and attempted to escape by swimming across the river. The problem is, murlocs are quite good at swimming, and so, on the banks of the adjacent Duskwood, just on the other side of the river, I experienced my first death. Anyway, after dying in this game, you have to do what's called a corpse run, where you turn into a ghost from the nearest graveyard and have to go back to the site of your death. After doing that, I got revenge on the murlocs, collected a bounty on them, and hearthstoned back to Goldshire. Now that we've finished up our adventures in the east of Elwynn Forest, now it's time to head to the west. The road is shorter than the one to Eastvale, but just as pleasant. And whilst we're on it, how about I go over how paladins actually work, because I realise I've not really done that yet. Fundamentally, in combat, paladins are all about seals. Throughout the course of the game, you get access to several different seals, and all of them apply a 30-second buff to your weapon swings. Pretty much all other classes will have lots of abilities to use that are entirely independent of auto attacks or weapon swings. Paladins are all about their weapon swings. Seals augment weapon swings, and most other abilities are instant cast and supposed to be used between them. But seals don't just affect weapon swings, they also affect judgment. Judgment is an instant cast spell, which does nothing without a seal. In fact, you can't even cast it without a seal active. Judgment will always do a bit of damage, but also have an extra secondary effect that is entirely unique depending on the seal used. Now, if you choose to make things more complicated for yourself, there is stuff like seal twisting, where you use server latency to have two seals active at the same time during a weapon swing, but that is something we'll likely never get into in this playthrough. I'm sure as I unlock more and more of the Paladin's spellbook, I'll go over more and more of it. If you're not a WoW or MMO player really, you'll see that there are loads of buttons at the bottom of the screen, and that looks quite confusing. But as a Paladin, most of those will only rarely be pressed. The bulk of gameplay is through seals, and thus automated through weapon swings. The rest of these icons are essentially a really wide toolset of auxiliary abilities that are only really brought out in certain use cases, and I always forget to use them. So this little pocket of Elwynn is called Westbrook, and at the Westbrook garrison there's another bounty to be had. In Eastvale, it could be argued that the main problem was the murlocs. Well, over here, the main problem is definitely the gnolls. The Riverpaw pack, or tribe, have infested the whole local area. Gnolls are typically a nuisance, but when corralled together by a strong leader can become quite a threat. In fact, around a century before the events of this game, the Gnoll War happened, where a huge pack of gnolls actually besieged Stormwind. And if it wasn't for some quick thinking by the king at the time, there's a good chance the whole kingdom would have been gone long before the Dark Portal ever opened. So we need to get some armbands to prove that we've slain some of the Riverpaw, and also from this big wanted poster is a bounty on Hogger, the leader of this local group. Hogger is one of World of Warcraft's most iconic characters because if you're a human, he's the first boss. He's typically the first time you need to properly band up with other people and kill something. Before this point, you can get by playing alone, but to get past Hogger, you need to engage with the social dynamics present within this game. It's almost like the wake-up moment where a WoW player either becomes addicted or falls off of the experience. So it's here with Hogger that I group up for the first time. Now, Season of Discovery's buffs to XP gain mean that I was a bit overleveled for this, and we had absolutely no problem taking on Hogger. The authentic experience would be maybe a 3 to 4 man party who takes down Hogger maybe after losing 1 or 2 players. And whilst I am slightly sad that that experience wasn't replicated in this video, I am happy that I can actually do this content easily and then therefore easily show it to you. but as this adventure continues and expands into areas further and further away from the human heartland, I'm more than certain that things will get more dangerous, regardless of any XP buff. Anyway, in this little expedition I went on in Westbrook, I wasn't just looking for some armbands and Hogger, I was also looking for a rare drop for a rare quest. And it took me a while to get it, so here's a little combat montage. And here it is, a mysterious note. The note is a schedule of when shipments of gold will be transported from the mines of Elwynn Forest to somewhere. This operation seems to be overseen by someone called the Collector, who resides here in Elwynn Forest to the east. What's strange is that aren't these mines supposed to be infested with kobolds? And why did we find it on a knoll? The Marshal back in Goldshire will want to see this. Well, it looks as if we're done here in Westbrook, and therefore Elwynn Forest, our first zone. But what's this over here? It's a bank in a fork in the river. And when swimming over there, it seems quite darkened, like a darkened bank. On this small island, next to a couple of graves, is Ada Gelhart, the paladin who went missing from Stormwind Cathedral and who we've been looking for. We give her the passphrase that was on the charred note, and then she says that I've done as your masters asked and apostatized. Please accept me into your fold. Let me join the cult of the damned. So this opens up a whole new way of thinking. This idea that apostasy is not necessarily commonplace, but known. The fact that there are converts from the Church of the Light into the cult of the damned. And this is a prelude to our future adventures. We ask her to please come home, but she's having none of it.
Farewell.
She's quite a tough enemy, much more tough than Hogger. And when we get her on the back foot, she stops fighting and tries to bargain with us. She says, like some kind of Sith Lord, that there are dark powers far greater than those of the light. Powers of shadow and the damned that she can show us if we let her go. And we accept her offer. We let her go and learn our first dark power. The rune that she actually hands us is called Divine Light, which makes no sense. This is because later on in Season of Discovery's lifespan, balance changes were made to abilities that paid absolutely no attention to the season's narrative content. Right towards the end of the season, they even added a rune broker, a vendor in several areas throughout the game, where you can just buy all of the runes for a very low price as opposed to doing any of Season of Discovery's unique quests. I am not a fan of this. And the reason why the rune broker hasn't yet been brought up in this series is because I refuse to interact with it any more than I have to. And in this case, I do have to interact with it, because the rune you're supposed to get from this quest is Seal of Martyrdom. Season of Discovery's adaptation of the Blood Elf seal from the Burning Crusade expansion, Seal of Blood. This new seal is very powerful, and it's the one we'll be using for essentially the rest of this entire playthrough. Let's not tell Dothorian about it though. I feel as if he wouldn't approve. So we do our hand-ins and then go back to Marshal Dugan in Goldshire. He instructs us to track down and kill this collector. Not too long ago, we went far to the east in the forest, in the southern half of Elwynn Forest, and arrived at the Brackwell Pumpkin Patch, where we killed a huge boar called Princess. It's actually at this farm where Morgan the Collector resides. He's a bit like Elwynn Forest's secret boss. So there's him, who is quite formidable on his own, but also his two companions, a mage called Serena Galadon and a fighter-type Defias bandit called Erlen Drudgemore. And yeah, these people work for the Defias. So it seems that the Defias are not only encroaching upon Elwynn Forest quite rapidly, but also have some kind of deal worked out with both the kobolds and the gnolls to pilfer gold from Stormwind's mines. We knew they were a threat, but it seems like we're only just scratching the surface of a grand plan. A grand plan we'll learn about as we head west out of Elwynn in the next episode. Furthermore, upon returning to the Marshal in Goldshire and handing Morgan the Collector's ring over, he recognizes it, not as just some trinket, but as a membership ring for the Stonemasons Guild in Stormwind. And he asks, quite rightly, why would a lowly thief have an artisan guild ring, and why the Defias thieves collecting money from our mines? And whilst pondering over this important question, we head back to Stormwind and finally catch back up with Gazin. It seems that though we saved Henzer's life, he's not made it back yet, and that does make sense. He did die. But regardless, we report our success, and Gazin takes the Defias script from us. The script is going straight to the King's advisors, and we're going straight back to Dithorian to report our success.
Watch your back.
We get congratulated on our victory, and rewarded, very importantly, with redemption. Redemption is the Paladin's res spell. With this, we can resurrect any dead player to life. This is a critically important spell, and it's rewarded through a narratively interesting quest. It's the first of World of Warcraft's class quests for the Paladin, and I'll make sure that each time one of them comes along, we give it special attention, because they deserve it. And that's our adventures in Elwynn Forest wrapped up. Speaking of wrapping things up, I'm also going to train the first aid profession, and also the mining, smithing, fishing, and cooking professions, because I like to be prepared, and there is some unique content only for those who have done their professions. First aid, fishing, and cooking are called secondary professions. All characters can take them, but primary professions can only be taken 2 at a time. I picked ours as mining and smithing because I thought they'd be the most appropriate for a paladin, and arguably the most useful, as with it we can make big melee weapons and heavy armor the kind a paladin would wear. This is a bit of a gamble of time investment to see if it pays off when we get access to interesting quests and good loot. It's also quite a big grind, so I won't be showing it in these videos a lot. Hopefully you won't see the labour, just the fruits of it. Now that work has dried up in Elwynn Forest, it's time to head west to Westfall. Westfall, despite being Elwynn's close neighbour, has not shared in its prosperity over the years. There is a strong Defias presence there, and from what we've now learned, if we don't try to intervene, things are about to get a whole lot worse. There's some kind of conspiracy afoot. Let's try and stop it. Now for Cataclysm's rendition of Elwynn Forest. Last time we were finished in the western part of Elwynn Forest, and now we're onto Eastvale. And things are a whole lot easier. The Murloc village where I had my first death, trampled straight through it. The bundles of logs that were quite hard to find previously, highlighted. There's not much to show this time around, as the quests are almost exactly the same, only combat is way easier, and there are many small quality of life changes. One change though is that we have access to what I believe was originally a warrior-only quest. There is a wanted bounty on someone called James Clark in Eastvale, and this is a very morally questionable act. Despite there being a bounty on his head, there doesn't really seem to be any massively incriminating evidence in his house, just his 2 kids, Kyle and Kevin. All the same, we kill the man, right in front of his children. And he drops the gold pickup schedule. This is the item that I farmed gnolls for ages for, and the one that leads to the Collector quest. This quest and Morgan the Collector and his 2 companions are still in the game. It plays out the same way, though of course the Defias no longer exist in Cataclysm, and so did we canonically never defeat this man or find this quest in the original versions of the game? That's a question I guess we'll never get the answer to. One important change in the modern version of the game, though, is with mounts. Now, in our Season of Discovery adventures, mounts will be something that is unlocked at levels 40 and 60. In retail, though, I don't think you need any particular level, maybe it's 10, to ride a horse. And so I went to Stormwind and got a horse. And I have to say, the long journeys across the roads in Elwynn Forest go by way better. Sadly, in retail, the redemption spell is automatically unlocked, and so the entire quest line with reviving Henza and being at the hero's vigil never happens. The quest no longer exists. But one new thing which is very interesting is Hogger's quest. Instead of us just killing him, like originally, this time when he's near death, people from Stormwind teleport in and take him away to the stockades. It's hard to gauge emotion from text, but it seems like Hogger's reaction to this is a bit unconvincing. And I wonder if there's more to this that we'll discover later on. And that's it for this Paladin's journey too. Because combat is a lot easier in retail, I don't feel the pressure to level any kind of professions. Though I did pick up archaeology in the slim chance that we end up using it. You never know. Okay, so that's our adventures done with for this video. This video was really long, and it was only really covering the second half of Elwynn Forest's quests. From now on, I'm aiming to do one zone per video. Though some stuff, like instanced content and cross-continental quest lines, will require a lot more attention than this, and so there will be, I guess, spin-off episodes between those zones. Questions and answers. If you want to ask a question which may pop up at the end of each All Across Azeroth video, either ask it as a comment in the video or send it to these characters here. First question. What if, after completing all green-yellow quests in the Classic area, you get a mail calling you to action to the other zones? So this was something I just did in this episode. I got a breadcrumb quest to take me to Loch Modan and I turned it down. And this is because this playthrough isn't necessarily trying to be encyclopedic. I don't need to do all of the content in the game. I just need to provide a consistent, coherent story of a leveling human paladin, which properly explores the areas that the paladin does go to. Going to all of the zones and doing all of the quest lines sounds great, but is way too ambitious for me. So for now, I'm going to stick with the human starting zones, and then as I level, work out what I'm going to do from there onwards. Question 2. Is there some story beats or quests you prefer in retail versus classic? Honestly, I don't really know much about retail. I mean, if we're doing a direct comparison, we're probably talking about Cataclysm quest content, right? So far, most of it's been the same. However, I don't like that there are some things completely missing. Most importantly, the redemption quest that was just done in this video. So we'll have to see as I progress through the zones what I think of each one and how it compares up overall. Question 3. Which zone are you looking forward to the most? I tried to think about this and I don't know. Maybe Hillsbrad and Alterac. I think those might be my favourite zones, bar Elwynn Forest. The thing is though, in my brain, I don't really tend to divide Azeroth into zones all the time. Maybe subzones. Like, for example, I love things like Thoradin's Wall, which is kind of between two zones, but it's still a landmark that really sticks out in my memory as a favourite place. I also really like the arse end of Deadmines, that massive door in Stranglethorn Vale. Those might be my favourite points of interest, but as for zones, I guess Hillsbrad. Question 4. How do you make the fly-through shots? I make these fly-through shots with a program called Bugcraft Studio. As the name suggests, it's buggy, it's not been updated in years, and it only works with certain versions of World of Warcraft, but it gets the job done. And last question. Would you ever consider making or venturing into making an add-on yourself? So I may have misspoke in the last Q&A, because when I meant modder, I meant that I mod games using mods that people have already made. I love installing and configuring mods. I don't really make them. Well, I have made some mods over the years, but I don't have any real programming knowledge, and so the furthest I've gone is messing around with text files. The only mod you could ever have known me for is the Assorted Inventory mod for Kingdom Come Deliverance. That is the closest I've ever come to being a modder, and though loads of people did use it back in the day at least, It represents as far as my tiny brain can go into mod making. And so when it comes to, say, making World of Warcraft add-ons, I wouldn't even know where to start. The making of mods aside though, I do want to talk about mods more. I'm very passionate about them and their communities. And if I do, it will probably find its way onto my alt channel, Verigant. Thanks for watching, and thank you to YouTube members Morian, Nightseeker, Patrick Manhora, Lewis H, Miffy, Hydroxyl, Edward Russell Duck, XPM Dobro Cortez, AC, Marked as Red, Jerry Freeman, Guat Defouk, Gaming Piper, Emma to the Max, Ryken, Hervis Daubeny, and Surfrock. Thanks, guys.